electricity equals emissions. So in 2002 and 2003, we launched the website, the Sustainable Web Design Rating System. So the purpose of the rating system is to bring clarity to a conversation that text, no bearing on what anyone in their day-to-day could go, this is good and this is bad. We had a number, but was that number any good? So as part of the proposal, we broke it up into we broke up the rating system into I guess, a similar thing that we've seen in other places in our life, white goods. White goods all have ratings, and those are based on the energy that they consume as well, and from that you'd be able to understand the emissions that they generate. But in the context of web, we have an A through F system. This is, I guess, recognized across the world. And we've used the HTTP archive, I guess, estimates or data to break down segments that we feel represent acceptable boundaries. So the F in this rating system is considered the 50% mark of the total data that HTTP archive has collected. So HTTP archive will index millions and millions of pages. It'll put it in a big data set, and you can see that each percentile, this is the certain transfer size. So we consider the 50 percentile mark. So if we have a website that is 0 and a website that is 100, that 50 megabyte site right in the middle would be the failure. In this context though, failure comes in at about 2.4 megabytes. So that's not a lot of data to work with. And achieving an A+ rating is designed to be something that you have to actively work towards. These ratings shouldn't be something that you can get just by, making one quick change. It's incremental changes to achieve an overall result, something that you have to consider from day one as part of the design process. So, why should I care though? So, other than the planet, and carbon emissions, websites that are considered more efficient generally have better performance. So because they're a much smaller transfer size, they generally load much quicker. Now there's much more that goes into having a fast website, but if your website's only 50 kilobytes and another website is 10 megabytes and you're on a mobile connection, that 50 kilobyte site is going to load much quicker. Accessibility and inclusivity. So in different situations in life, we all actually encounter situational disabilities. We could be on a train where we can't have a phone call, or we can't listen to something, we can't have volume up loud, so we need to be able to read. The same goes for the bandwidth available to you when you're on a train or on a plane. You might not be able to have a large amount of data transferred without an expensive cost. So if you consider, I guess, the principles of sustainable web design, you're actually making the website better for everyone in general. Hosting costs. So some hosting providers will charge you for data egress. They'll also charge you for storage. So if you are minimizing the, I guess, amount of data that you're transmitting over the wire and the amount of data that you're storing, your costs for hosting could come down. Maintenance, so websites that are more efficient generally have less moving parts. That means that they're easier to maintain for the long term. Improved UX, because the principles of sustainable web design force us to consider the user and what the goals of the user should be in any time so that they can get to their, I guess, ultimate goal when they're visiting your site quicker, we achieve a better UX for everyone. SEO and SEM. So faster websites rank higher in Google. That's a given. And Google uses the page speed that your site shows as a contributing factor to the cost that you pay for your advertising. So if we use the principles of sustainable web design, have a more efficient website, have a smaller website, those costs could come down. And finally, emissions. We'd like our planet to be here for a long time into the future. One thing that I have left off this slide is a new piece of law that has come through from the government, and that is mandatory climate-related financial disclosures for any business that has over $500 million in revenue, $1 billion in assets, or over 500 employees. So any business that meets one of those categories will have to disclose what their impact on the environment is, and their website contributes to that. So once again, it's about all of these little pieces contributing to an ultimate goal. So now that we can kind of see how emissions are generated and why it's important to us, how do we measure it? So over the last few years, several people in the industry and organizations in the industry have developed a few tools to help us do that. Two of the first to ever come out were Website Carbon and EcoGrader. Now these tools are both publicly available. You go to the homepage, put in your domain, or put in an explicit page on your site. It will run a crawl of that page to understand several elements of it, what the transfer size is, and whether or not it's on renewable energy. And then it will return an estimate of what the emissions are for that page view. So Website Carbon is by Whole Grain Digital, a company I used to work for, and EcoGrader is by Mighty Bytes. Two other tools. The first one is EcoPing by Dryden Williams. So EcoPing is a little different compared to the previous two. EcoPing will collect data and run these tests at scheduled intervals for you. So in a similar way that we have performance monitoring tools, we now have one for monitoring the emissions of our site. So we can see that, someone made a change and that resulted in greater emissions on this day. We can now track that. And the second one on this page is a personal project of my own. It's called the Index. And the Index is a quantifiable means to measure websites against each other. It does piggyback off of the work that Google has done with Lighthouse, but it's quite a cool tool. You can narrow down into specific categories. So here we can see that we've got the ASX, so top 500. You can have a look at the Australian political parties and see how they all benchmark against each other. We haven't used this for, I guess, any targeted campaigns, but you can kind of see where it could be fun based on whatever's going on in the world at any given time. Another one of the tools explicitly for WordPress is Website Carbon for WordPress. So this is a tool that I developed as well. You install the plugin in your site, and then it will put another little column next to, I guess, your posts in the admin area. And it will show you what the emissions are for loading that page. I will be releasing an update to this plugin soon enough, which will bring in that rating system as well. So rather than looking at a number that might not be too meaningful, we'll have that rating system that gives a much more transferable piece of information to look at. Another tool that I have just open sourced is the Sustainable Web Design widget. So all of these tools that I've shown you so far require the website to be live. They require a publicly accessible URL. The Sustainable Web Design widget is a little JavaScript file that you can include in your development site, and it sits in the bottom right corner until you open it up. And as you scroll through the site, it will show you the assets that are loaded, the transfer size, the emissions correlated with the transfer size, as well as the rating. Now, further down in the widget that you just can't see, it's a little bit off screen, there's a toggle to control which version of the Sustainable Web Design formula you want to use. So currently we're at version 4, and version 4 is using the latest information available in studies to estimate the emissions, but it's got the previous 3 versions there as well, and those go back to about 2017. The link is there for anyone who wants to play with it. I'll just continue working on it and making it a bit more pretty. So, now that we've seen how emissions can be estimated and how they are generated by, I guess, the web and how we can monitor them, how do we actually improve them? How do we make an impact here? Now, one of the quickest changes, I guess, that can be made in the context of building an entire website is the hosting. So hosting lives on top of data centers. Data centers require energy, and the energy has to come from somewhere. So there's two great resources that you can play with. The Green Web Foundation has a database of renewable energy hosting providers. You can search through it by country, and you can also search through it by what you're explicitly looking for. So it could be, a VPS, it could be just cloud compute. Those filters are there, and there are some WordPress hosts in there as well. Kinsta and a couple of the other providers work on top of Google's data centers and AWS's data centers, so they are considered, based on where you choose, to be somewhat, I guess, sustainable. The other tool is electricity maps. Now, this is a lot of data collated into a view that is actually quite digestible. You can zoom out to see the whole world, zoom into a little, state somewhere, hover it, and it will have this little pop-up that shows you what the energy intensity of that, of the electricity in that area. So when we say energy intensity for X amount of electricity, this is the emissions of it. So you can zoom out, see the whole world. Now, Australia, unfortunately, isn't the greatest place to host websites due to the fact that a lot of our energy is not considered renewable or not considered low energy intensity. That being said, there are, peripheral locations as long as you're willing to compromise on that speed a little bit. And if we hosted in New Zealand, we're still talking a very, very fast connection. So when we're looking to make improvements within the site itself rather than the infrastructure around it, the best thing we can do is to take a look at the transfer size and the emissions, or just the transfer size of the assets on our site. So if you open up the dev tools of most browsers, you can go to the network tab, and then you can order the transfer size there to find the biggest files. So what we're looking at here is the median transfer sizes from the HTTP archive for probably a month ago. So we can see that, the median size of videos on desktops was about 4.4 megabytes, which is, already getting an F. So if you had an auto-playing video of that size, game over already. But we look for the biggest target, and I've sorted these here by generally what the biggest targets are in any website. Video, because of the nature of it, is just quite a large file. So what we want to do is look to optimize that. Images generally, because they can be very poorly optimized. Maybe they're not in the right format, maybe they're not the right size. They're the second biggest target. JavaScript and everything that JavaScript can bring with it is generally your third biggest target. And then finally, fonts. CSS and HTML is a little bit harder to optimize because the gains that you're going to get don't represent the same gains for the amount of investment. There are gains to be made there, but not quite the same. So, if we have a look at optimizing video, starting with self-hosted, the principles of sustainable web design will tell you don't have auto-playing videos. But when we're producing websites, brand will always come first. It has to. The impact and the way that you tell a story for a brand will result in whether or not a customer will convert with them. So OS Studios is a Gen Z experiential event marketing business. And they use videos to communicate a lot of the work that they do. So we tried to work out a way to bring that into the website without having a dramatic impact on the emissions. And the way we did that was by putting the video in a context in which we could crunch it. Now, by crunch it, I mean drop the resolution, drop the frame rate, drop the encoding, so that we could get as much transfer size out of it as possible. So whilst the work that I generally do aims for a bit higher, this page with a couple of auto-playing videos still gets a C. It is possible to do it, it just has to be considered, rather than just, hey, let's just slap this 15 megabyte video above the fold with some text over the top. Is that really the best way to work or best way to communicate something to the end user? The second videos that we can look at are embeds. So embeds are YouTube, Vimeo, Wistia, anything like that. Now, Google Lighthouse will report on any videos that you load on your page that come from a third party. And that's because it can detect the assets that are being loaded from those third parties. So even in Google's own analytics tool for performance, it will tell you to use what is called a facade. Now, a facade will put an image in front of the video, but by putting the image in front of it in a particular way, you defer the loading of any resource from that third party. So by putting a facade in front of a YouTube embed, all you're loading is that image. And that image can be hosted on your own server. It can be optimized using your tooling. So in this example here, a page without a YouTube embed, this is, I think, 2021, 2022. It loads, 20.7 kilobytes. As soon as we add a YouTube embed, that goes up to about a megabyte, 930. That's a huge impact just for getting that video there before anyone's even interacted with it. And if we put a facade in front of it, that page transfer size comes down immediately to 35 kilobytes. So the impact has been minimized to only 15 kilobytes compared to the 910 difference between not having the video at all. This is done by a couple of plugins that you can use. So this is Lazy Embed. There are a few different options for customizing the facade. So you can change out the play button, you can change the image that's presented there. The facade or Lazy Embed will automatically pull a placeholder from YouTube. So you don't have to go get a custom one yourself. It will pick the one that YouTube decided was the most, applicable. And I think you can control that by setting thumbnails in YouTube as well when you upload. But there are controls so that you can style it to look the way you want as well. Another option is embed privacy. So where Lazy Embed only works with a few providers that automatically provide images, like YouTube provides one, Vimeo provides one. Embed privacy comes at it from a different angle. It's looking at the GDPR, if that's something you're aware of here, but the analytics and tracking kind of side of it. And we'll put up a do you consent to watching this video, which is still a facade. And once you interact with that, it will then load the full video. Images. So the web supports multiple image formats. The long-standing ones are JPEG, PNG, and GIF, and probably a few others. But there's been a few new image formats introduced over the last few years, and one of those is WebP, and one of them is AVIF. So looking at these two images here, the one on the left is a JPEG, and the one on the right is an AVIF. Now, I know screenshots of an image aren't a great way to look at the quality, but the fact is that they both look the same. There was no image degradation. And the result of converting the JPEG to an AVIF is a reduction in almost 58% of the file size. Now, this is just one example. We've seen this go as high as 70%, and this can be implemented in a way that has no negative impacts, to your customer. It will modify the HTML slightly so that it includes first the AVIF, then the WebP, and then the JPEG or the PNG as a fallback. So for browsers that support AVIF and WebP, which is over 92% and over 95% for Australia, if you hook up your analytics to Can I Use, it will tell you what features are supported by the audience of your websites. You might not even need those fallbacks. Those numbers might be even higher. There's a couple of tools that we can use to automate this process for us. Now, depending on how you build your site, one solution might be better than the other. So if you use, I guess, off-the-shelf themes, page builders, you don't get a lot of direct access to the code itself to modify the image tags to be what you need them to do. So if you use a tool like Short Pixel Adaptive Image, unfortunately it is licensed, but you can get a license for about, I don't know, it's a yearly fee, it's less than $100. It's not consequential. You can install that plugin and it will automatically detect the size that your image is being presented at and then optimize the size for the image, for the presentation, as well as the format. And you don't have to think about it. It just works. There's a few other plugins to do this and they're linked there as well. Now, optimizing images also comes in serving images in the correct size. So previously we were just talking about the format, JPEG, PNG. Now we're talking about the size that the image is served at. So when we look at an image tag like this, we can see three key attributes that are important for, I guess, providing different image sizes. You've got the source. Now the source attribute is what is going to work in every browser. It's legacy. We also have the source set. And what the source set does is it provides different versions of the same image at different sizes so that the browser can go, okay, the image is being presented at 300 pixels. I don't need a 1200 pixel wide image. I'll use this one instead. And the third attribute that's important is the sizes attribute. Now the sizes attribute is like a media query. So in the same way that we have media queries in CSS where we write at media min width 768 pixels, we write one for the image as well. And what that does, it says that for a maximum width of 1023 pixels, this image is presented at 266 pixels wide. After that, it's presented at 300 pixels. Now, the browser will use that information to then pick the right image out of the source set and the sizes for you. So you can say which is the right image for each scenario. The beautiful thing that will be coming to the web is that we can replace the whole sizes attribute, which is the hardest part of optimizing images in this way, with the word auto. So the spec is currently being discussed and worked upon, and when it is released and it's implemented by the browsers, that whole media query will be gone. You just provide a list of the 5 different image sizes, the original one, which is, could be 2,500 pixels wide, one that's 1,500 pixels, one that's 800 pixels, one that's 200, and based on where it's presented, the browser will go, I'll use that one. So it's choosing the right image for the right scenario with zero overhead like we currently have to do. The third biggest target is font files. So font files generally have a lot of characters in them that aren't in use by the website. So if you download a Google font, it will generally have 400, 500 characters in it. Now, for an English-only website, you might only need 120, 150 of those characters. And one of the tools that exists to help us visualize this is Wacomai Fondue. Now, that sounds crazy, but if we break it down a little bit, it's what can my font do? Really fun. The design of the site has a lot of character, really great. But what you can do is you can upload that font file, TTF, OTF, WAF2, I think it's all supported, and it will show you what those characters are. So you can see, oh, that's all waste. We don't need that. Now, if you were building a multilingual site, you might need half those characters, and that font size is okay. But if you don't need those characters, there's a lot of room left on the table for optimization. So if we have a look here, the original TTF for a demo font file had 690 characters in it, and it was 132 kilobytes. Now, in the wake of images and videos, might seem inconsequential. But if we're looking for perfection, let's go searching for it. So, 690 characters, 132 kilobytes. If we subset the font file, and what we mean by subset is by removing those characters that we don't need, we can bring that transfer size down to 15 kilobytes. Huge gain, 89% reduction. And if we convert that TTF, which is an older font file format, into a WOF2 with the same amount of characters, that again comes down to 8.7 kilobytes. So from originally having a transfer size of 132 down to 8.7, we've saved 93.5% of the transfer. At the moment, we've only really talked about the sustainability kind of end of this, but this will have a big impact on performance as well. So one of the problems of loading custom web fonts is the flash of unstyled text at the start. You'll either see nothing at all because that's the setting that you've chosen in your CSS, and until that custom font file loads, you get nothing, or you'll get Times New Roman, Arial, and then when that custom font loads, it will then switch over that font. Anything that we can do to make that load faster is great. So dropping the font size, big way to do that. Optimizing JavaScript. Now, this one can be a bit more challenging, but in short, it comes down to remove what is not necessary, remove dependencies on plugins, and recompile your code. So when we talk about remove what is not necessary, we can start to look at modern features or functionality that's been implemented in browsers that we had to custom code before. Now, accordions where you only had one of them open, one item open, we had to custom code that with JavaScript. That is now natively supported in browsers, 90-something%, I'm fairly certain. The same goes for modals or pop-ups. We now have the dialog element, and we can remove all of those custom JavaScript implementations for having a pop-up. And the benefit of having the native behavior as well is that we get all the accessibility benefits. Previously, when we had a pop-up with JavaScript, we would have to implement the focus state and trap the focus within that dialog so that if the user was tabbing through the interactive elements, the tab then didn't go outside of that window. That functionality is now handled natively by the browsers. So anything that we can look at and go, oh, that's done in a legacy way, I can update that. That's what we're talking about when removing what is not necessary. Reducing dependence on plugins. Now, plugins are great. They help us solve problems that are too complicated to rebuild on our own. And that's kind of the dividing line for me with using plugins. If it's going to take a lot of effort to rebuild it and maintain it long term, then I'll use a plugin, I'll use something off the shelf for it. But if I can replace an entire plugin and all of the bloat that comes with it with a few lines of code, that's the approach that I'll take. So on the right, we're looking at the files transferred for one of the biggest form plugins in WordPress. These files here don't exist on the front end if you don't load the form. So simply by having that form there, we're bringing with it probably over 100 kilobytes just to have that form submission. And that will handle some of the more complicated logic, email validation, maybe there's pagination on the form, but maybe that's also not the best or not necessary for that form. We could have a form that simply is a newsletter sign up. That's a few lines of code rather than about 100 kilobytes to go with it. and recompile your code. So for those of us that are building our themes from scratch with build tools, there's a lot of kind of infrastructure in place that makes sure that our code works in different environments and different browsers. And two of those tools are Babel and Browsers List. Now, the Browsers List will help you define what browsers you want to support. And based on the features that you use in your code, Babel will go, oh, that's not supported in that browser. I need to, we call it polyfilling, but bake that functionality into your custom file so that it will work everywhere that you've defined. But let's say you build your website, 2 years go by, and then you rebuild it again. Browser support has changed over that time, and those pieces of functionality that needed to be polyfilled before no longer need to be polyfilled. So literally by rebuilding your code, which if you use tools like Webpack, Gulp, Vite, anything like that, that's a few seconds. Open the command line tools, build, upload, job done. You might save yourself, 50 kilobytes, 100 kilobytes simply by doing that. Now, optimizing and tracking and analytics scripts. The index allowed me to see quite a lot of data about websites, and I categorized that data based on different aspects. So one of the things that I was interested in knowing is how much tracking data is loaded on any of the sites that are being monitored by the index. So for Fox Sports, they had 3 megabytes of analytics scripts. What are you doing with that data? Why are they collecting it? Are they analyzing it? Or is it just going into a data warehouse for no particular reason? What is the performance impact of this? So review what analytics tracking you have on your site. Maybe you don't need GTM. Maybe you don't need GTA. Maybe there's something like Plausible that you can use, which is a bit more efficient. Does come at a yearly cost, but you're also getting the privacy benefits of that. Take a look. This is one of the, big just black hole areas that are just wasted. So one of the things that I was thinking through when I was preparing these slides was the academic versus the practical. Now, the academic conversation will continue on for a long time, but that doesn't really help anyone make a practical improvement. So when considering the work that you're doing, building a new site, and the client that you're working with, their goals might be more conversions, faster website, better design. Consider sustainability, but it doesn't have to be a goal. Use it as a lens. Evaluate your decisions in design, in UX, in programming through that lens so that you can make an impact that's going to, improve the environment and probably improve the UX as well. Thank you for your time, and the slides will be available online.
Thank you, everyone. Anyone have questions?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. So I wanted to ask, let's say hypothetically you've got a procedure for building websites and you've calculated that it's going to be like 40 hours, let's say for argument's sake. So you've got this procedure already and you can just rinse and repeat and do this for all your small business clients. But say you wanted to implement everything that you've just told us about, implement that into your procedures. Could you roughly estimate how much more time or budget you would allocate for that?
Sure, so it's not a black and white answer, or there's no definitive number. If you are, considering the impact of your work in the lens of sustainability at every single stage, then there might be a percentage buffer on each of those. But at the same time, because you're considering it during the design phase, maybe that complicated piece of functionality that had a pop-up with an accordion and so on won't actually exist. That doesn't help the UX, so that piece of functionality might be gone, and therefore it becomes quicker. So that first part is hard to quantify. To implement the facade on a YouTube or Vimeo embed, log into WordPress, go to plugins, search lazy embed, click activate, job done. So that's pretty quick. I think there was a couple of plugins. Let me go back. So optimizing images, so the format and the size. Now, I mentioned Short Pixel. I've worked with Short Pixel for a long time. I don't have any affiliation with them. I've submitted code fixes to them, and they've been great in working with. So there's that there. But once again, install the plugin. There's a couple of different settings around what kind of image compression you like. Make it crisp as it can be, which will probably just remove the metadata for the images. You can say glossy, which is like a hybrid between, let's drop the file size, but keep the fidelity, and lossy, which is like, hey, crunch it. There might be a little bit of degradation. So to have the biggest impact that you can, videos and images, that stuff's fairly quick to implement. If you wanted to redesign a whole site within the lens of the sustainable web design principles, then it's a bit more involved.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, everyone. And today is finished. If you want to have more information, please go to room 1. There's an event tonight. Otherwise, see you tomorrow. Thank you.
And I'll be around if anyone wants to ask more questions. Thank you.